Ladies and gentlemen, today I bring a word that may confront you, unsettle you, but it will awaken you. We live in an age where the first question society asks you is, what do you do? But in the kingdom, God's first question is always, who are you? There is a great deception in our generation, and it sounds holy, it sounds responsible, it sounds mature, go get a job. But I declare to you today, God never said that. From the beginning, not employment but assignment in Genesis, when God formed Adam, he didn't say, I've posted a listing in Eden Times, apply now. No, he said, tend the garden. He didn't hire Adam, he commissioned him. He didn't pay him, he empowered him. Work was not a means of survival. It was an expression of worship. Adam was not employed, he was deployed. He had no resume, he had revelation. He had no clock to punch, he had a purpose to fulfill. Fire from Babylon to destiny. You were not born for Babylon, you were born for Zion. But Babylon says, come, be a servant of Pharaoh, give your strength for silver, sell your time for bread. But God is calling his people out of that system. Out of Egypt, out of striving, out of merely surviving. He is saying, don't look for a job, look for your assignment. Because if you seek a job, you may find employment, but if you seek me, you'll find destiny. Provision follows vision. When God called Abraham, he didn't say, settle down and secure a pension. He said, go to a land I will show you. He didn't show Abraham the provision before the journey. He didn't guarantee comfort, he promised covenant. He said, walk by faith, not by contract. And so Abraham left Ur, not with a job offer, but with a word, and that word made him a father of nations. Stop asking to be hired, start asking to be sent. Beloved, you are not here to fill a job title. You are here to fulfill a kingdom purpose. Don't chase what the world calls opportunity, chase what heaven calls obedience. The Hebrew word for work, avada, is also the word for worship. So if your work is not worship, you're working in the wrong field. Final word, this is the hour of releasing the Josephs. Joseph didn't fill out applications in prison. But when his moment came, Pharaoh called for him, and in one day he was elevated, because he was aligned. He didn't need a job. He had a dream, a gift, and the favor of God. Stop looking for a job. Start asking for your mantle. Stop applying for survival. Start stepping into your calling. Because this is the hour when God is saying, I will not employ you. I will anoint you. I will not hire you. I will send you. And if you will step out in faith like Abraham, like Joseph, like Paul, you will not live from paycheck to paycheck. You will live from glory to glory. He who has ears, let him hear. You were not created to be employed. You were created to be deployed. That simple but profound truth shifts the entire foundation of how you see your life, your purpose, and your provision. In the system of the world, employment is everything. From the moment we are children, we're trained to think like employees. Study hard, get good grades, apply for a job, build a career. The world says your value is tied to your productivity, and your productivity is defined by your job. But heaven doesn't operate like the world. Heaven doesn't send people to apply for positions. Heaven sends people into the earth on divine assignments. When God formed you in your mother's womb, he didn't say, I'll make this one a plumber, or this one will be a graphic designer. No, he said, this one will carry my glory, this one will reflect my image, this one will be a messenger, a builder of kingdom realities, a vessel through which I will move. You were made in the image of ascending God. The same God who sent Moses to Pharaoh, who sent David to Goliath, who sent Esther to the throne room, who sent Jesus into the world. That God didn't make you to punch in and punch out, to survive until retirement. He made you to fulfill something eternal. That is deployment. To be deployed means you are assigned, commissioned, and sent with purpose and authority. A soldier doesn't beg for work. He receives a mission. A prophet doesn't fill out an application. He receives a word. A disciple doesn't send a resume. He hears the call, follow me. That's what God is saying to his people now. I didn't raise you up to be absorbed by the systems of Pharaoh. I raised you up to represent my kingdom on earth. When you live from a mindset of employment, you are always at the mercy of men. Your hope is tied to a company, a boss, a paycheck, and when man is your source, your soul is always anxious. Will I be hired? Will I be promoted? Will I be enough? But when you live from the reality of deployment, you realize you are already sent. You are already chosen. You are already commissioned. You carry the authority of heaven not because someone gave you a job, but because God gave you breath and an assignment with it. Jesus never told anyone to look for a job. He told them to follow him, to heal the sick, raise the dead, preach the kingdom. That was their deployment. When he sent out the 70, he didn't say, "Go find work." He said, "Go and preach that the kingdom has come near." And as they went, provision followed, doors opened, miracles occurred. They weren't employed, they were empowered. And here's the mystery. When you understand deployment, you may still work a job, but the job doesn't define you. You could be a janitor or a CEO, but those are merely platforms for your greater assignment. You don't go to work just to earn. You go to represent, to bring light into darkness, to carry heaven into earth. You may look like an employee in the natural, but in the spirit, you're an ambassador. And ambassadors don't beg for resources. They operate from the wealth of the government they represent. So stop asking, "God, where can I be hired?" and start asking, "God, where are you sending me?" Stop praying for employment and start praying for clarity of assignment. Because when you understand your assignment, everything changes. You'll walk into meetings differently. You'll see opportunities differently. You won't chase validation from a boss. You'll already be affirmed by your Father. This world is shaking. Economies rise and fall. Jobs come and go. But the one who is deployed by God is never unemployed. They are never without purpose, never without direction. The Father's business is always expanding, always in need of laborers, not employees, but sons and daughters who know their authority. You were not created for employment. You were created for deployment. So rise up, not as a worker in Babylon, but as a servant of the Most High. The harvest is ripe, the fields are ready, and the King is calling. Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? May your answer echo from eternity. Here I am, Lord, send me. In the mind of God, identity always comes before occupation. In the Scriptures, especially through the lens of Hebraic thought, we see that a person is not defined by what they do, but by who they are. This is radically different from how the modern world operates. Today, the first thing someone wants to know about you is your job title, your career, your status in the economic system. But in ancient Hebrew understanding, God's original pattern, your identity is rooted not in your labor, but in your lineage, not in your profession, but in your position as a child of God. What's even more striking is this. In biblical Hebrew, there is no exact word for job. In the way we use it today, the Hebrew language, especially in the Scriptures, does not frame human purpose through the lens of employment. There are words for work, like avada, which means work, service, or worship, but not for job, as a role you acquire to survive. That's because in the kingdom mindset, you were not put on this earth to find a job. You were placed here to fulfill a calling. The modern world says your job is your identity, but God says your identity is your foundation, and from it flows your assignment. You are not what you do. You are who God says you are. Before Jeremiah ever prophesied a single word, God told him, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." Notice the order: formation, knowing, consecration, and only then appointment. In other words, God identified Jeremiah before he ever assigned him. You see this pattern again and again. When Moses encounters the burning bush, he doesn't get a job offer. He gets a revelation of who God is, and in discovering who God is, he begins to discover who he is. When Isaiah sees the Lord high and lifted up, he first says, "Woe is me, I am undone." He doesn't get instructions right away. He is confronted with identity, with holiness, with who he is in the presence of God. Only after that does he hear the call, "Whom shall I send?" The same with Jesus. Before he ever performed a miracle, before he taught a single sermon, the Father spoke over him, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." His identity was affirmed before his mission began. Why does this matter? Because when you don't know who you are, you will spend your life chasing things to validate you. You'll cling to a job title because it gives you meaning. You'll live in fear of losing your position because deep down you think it's who you are. But when your identity is rooted in God, no job can define you and no loss can diminish you. You are not what you do. You do what you do because of who you are. In the world, a title defines the person. In the kingdom, the person carries the authority of heaven with or without a title. David was a shepherd boy, the youngest of 8 sons, overlooked and ignored, but he knew who he was before he ever stepped into the palace. He carried the identity of a warrior long before anyone handed him a sword. That's why he could run toward Goliath when trained soldiers ran away. He wasn't operating from occupation. He was operating from identity. God is calling his people back to this ancient understanding. He's stripping away the false security we've placed in careers, in resumes, in worldly status, and he's reestablishing the foundation of sonship. Before you were a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, or a business owner, you were a son, a daughter, a priest, a carrier of glory. Heaven is not interested in hiring you. It's interested in revealing you. And the only way you'll be revealed is by returning to who you are in him. So if you feel lost, if you feel like you're wandering without purpose, the answer is not to scramble for the next opportunity. The answer is to return to the identity that was spoken over you from the beginning. Get into the secret place, let the Father speak again, let him remind you, you are not what you do, you are mine, chosen, called, set apart. Before the first task, the first job, the first assignment, you were known. And in that knowing, everything you need is found. When you walk in identity, you don't chase positions. You carry presence. You don't beg for purpose. You embody it. You don't wait for permission. You walk in authority. Because you know, in the eyes of God, you were never meant to be defined by a job. You were meant to be known by your name. In the beginning, before there were cities, corporations, or contracts, there was a garden. And in that garden there was a man, not hired but formed, not employed but assigned. Adam was not created to look for work. He was created with work built into his very existence. But this work was not burdensome. It was not toil. It was not labor for survival. It was worship. In the divine design of Eden, work and worship were never meant to be separate. In fact, in the Hebrew language, the word avada means both work and worship. That alone tells us something powerful. What we do with our hands was always meant to be an offering from our hearts. God placed Adam in the Garden of Eden to tend and to keep it. That wasn't just a job description. It was an act of stewardship. Adam wasn't an employee of Eden. He was a priest over creation. He didn't clock in or out. He didn't earn wages. His provision wasn't tied to his performance. It was tied to his position. He was in relationship with the Creator, walking in the cool of the day, and from that intimacy flowed his assignment. The tending of the garden was an extension of his worship, not a requirement for survival. This concept challenges the way we see work today. For most people, work is something they have to do in order to live. But in the original pattern, work was something you got to do as an expression of living in harmony with God. Adam's work was sacred, not secular. It was ministry, not machinery. There was no separation between the spiritual and the practical. Every action was a form of communion with the Creator. Every task was infused with glory. But then came the fall. Sin entered the picture, and what was once worshipful work became cursed toil. God said to Adam, "By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread." The ground became resistant, and the labor became burdensome. But even in that, the original design wasn't destroyed. It was just delayed. Through Christ, the second Adam, the way back to sacred work was opened again. He came not just to redeem souls, but to restore purposes. To restore worship. And part of that restoration is understanding that your work when offered to God is worship once again. When you understand this, you begin to see your daily tasks differently. Whether you're raising children, running a business, building houses, or bagging groceries, if your heart is surrendered to God, your work becomes holy. You're not just doing a job, you're ministering. You're not just earning money, you're sowing into eternity. The garden mandate still stands, and you are still a steward. God is not looking for more employees. He's looking for priests in the workplace. He's looking for people who see their Monday morning not as a burden, but as an altar. People who don't need a pulpit to preach, because their hands speak of excellence, their attitude reveals grace, and their faithfulness reflects the Father. This is what Adam had before the fall, a life where everything he did was an act of worship. No separation, no compartments, just sacred rhythm. You don't need to leave your job to serve God. You need to invite God into your work. That is what redeems it. That is what sanctifies it. You could be a janitor, a chef, a software engineer, or a farmer. If you're doing it with the awareness that God has placed you there, it becomes ministry. It becomes Eden all over again, and here is the beautiful mystery. When work becomes worship, provision becomes natural. In Eden, Adam didn't strive for food. It was all around him. His assignment and his provision were perfectly aligned. And God wants to restore that alignment in your life, not necessarily by removing you from your job, but by shifting your understanding of it. You are not employed, you are assigned. You are not laboring for survival. You are serving from a place of sonship. This is the power of the garden mandate. It's not about going back to Eden physically. It's about returning to that spiritual state where every breath, every task, every effort is wrapped in purpose, where you don't just work for a living. You work because you're alive in God. And in that place, your work becomes worship again, and your life becomes a garden where heaven touches earth. God never calls you to chase provision. He calls you to follow vision. In the kingdom of God, the pattern is always the same. The vision comes first, and the provision follows. Yet in our modern mindset, we flip that order. We say, God, show me the money, then I'll move. Show me the resources, then I'll step out. Give me the safety net, and I'll follow you. But that's not how God works. He doesn't fund disobedience. He funds faith. When God spoke to Abram, he didn't hand him a financial plan, a map, or a 5-step strategy. He said, go to the land I will show you. That was the vision. It wasn't clear, it wasn't detailed, but it was divine. And because Abram obeyed the vision, provision began to flow. Along the way, he gained favor, flocks, wealth, and influence, not because he sought them, but because he pursued what God had spoken. Provision in the kingdom is not attracted to need. It is attracted to obedience. It flows in response to alignment, not ambition. We see it in the lives of those God used throughout Scripture. Noah didn't wait for timber to arrive before he started building the ark. He began with a word, and as he moved in faith, God provided what he needed. Moses didn't wait until he had resources to lead Israel. He moved with the staff in his hand and the word in his mouth, vision first. Provision second. We live in a world that trains us to think backwards. It says, secure your income, and then maybe you can pursue your dreams. Build a career first, then try to fulfill your calling later, if there's time. But God says, seek first the kingdom and my righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. That's divine order. Not seek provision first, not seek comfort first, but seek the vision I've placed in your spirit, and as you walk in it, I will supply everything you need. Elijah went to the brook because God told him to. That was the vision. And when he arrived, the provision met him there. Ravens brought him bread and meat. But when the brook dried up, God gave him a new instruction, a new vision. Go to Zarephath. And again, the provision awaited him, this time through a widow. The lesson, don't cling to yesterday's provision. Follow today's vision. Because when God gives you a word, he backs it up with his resources. But if you stay where he was instead of going where he is, the flow will stop. This truth is not just biblical, it's deeply personal. Many people spend their lives chasing security, never realizing that security is found in obedience. It may not look like the world's definition of stable, but when you walk in God's vision, He becomes your source. Your job may be a channel, but God is the source. If the channel dries up, the source doesn't. He will open another stream, another door, another opportunity, if you're willing to move with Him. Some people wait to feel ready before they step into their calling. But in the kingdom, readiness is not about having everything in place. It's about having the courage to follow God when things don't make sense. Peter didn't wait for the water to become solid before stepping out of the boat. He stepped out because Jesus said, "Come." The vision was the invitation, and as long as Peter kept his eyes on that vision, on Jesus, the water held him. But the moment he focused on the wind, on the lack, on the fear, he began to sink. Provision follows vision because vision is born from the heart of God. It carries heaven's backing. When you align your life with His purpose, you step into the flow of supernatural supply, not always in ways you expect, not always with excess, but always with enough. Enough for the journey, enough for the obedience, enough to fulfill what He's called you to do. So don't wait for everything to make sense. Don't wait for the bank account to grow or the door to open on its own. If God has given you a word, move, step out, trust Him, because when you honor the vision, you make room for the provision, and in that place you'll discover that God is not only the giver of vision, He is also the sustainer of it. The God who called you is the God who will provide, always. God never said, "Go find a job." He said, "Go into all the world." That is the mandate, that is the command, and yet so many of God's people have exchanged the Great Commission for a job description. We have settled for surviving when we were called to subdue. We chased salaries when we were meant to carry authority, but the command of heaven was never employment, it was deployment, not go and apply, but go and occupy, not find work, but bring the kingdom. The final words of Jesus before He ascended were not instructions for a career path. He didn't gather His disciples and say, "Now, make sure you all find something safe to do." No, He said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations." That is not a suggestion, it is not a side project. It is a royal commission, and it was never meant just for apostles and prophets. It was meant for every believer, you, me, all of us. This is our calling. Go into all the world. That doesn't mean you have to board a plane or hold a microphone. It means wherever God has placed you, your office, your classroom, your community, your home is your world. That's your territory. Your assignment, that's where you are deployed. You may work in IT or healthcare or education, but if you belong to Jesus, then you are a kingdom agent first and foremost. Your job is not your identity. It is a platform for your deployment. Too many of God's people are waiting for permission, waiting for a title, waiting for a sign, but Jesus already gave the order, go. That means you are already sent. You don't need the approval of man when you have the commission of God. The Spirit of the Lord is upon you, not just to make you feel good, but to send you out, to preach good news to the poor, to bind the broken, to proclaim freedom to the captives. And that assignment doesn't begin when you enter ministry. It begins when you understand that you already are in ministry. Ministry doesn't begin on a platform. It begins with a heart that says yes to God. It begins in boardrooms and backyards, in coffee shops and cubicles. Wherever you go, you are a representative of the kingdom. You are a carrier of light. And when you show up in obedience, heaven backs you up. Miracles happen when the sent ones realize they're already sent. But here's what often happens. People spend their whole lives trying to find their calling. When God already gave it, He said, go. The question is not whether you are called. The question is whether you are going. We're waiting for the perfect conditions, waiting until we feel confident or fully equipped. But the disciples didn't feel ready either. They were doubting, fearful, unsure. Yet Jesus still said, go. Because He knew they wouldn't go alone, He promised them power. He promised them His presence. Lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. That means when you step into your assignment, you don't go empty. You go full, full of the Holy Spirit, full of authority, full of divine purpose. You may not have a job title that sounds spiritual, but you carry a commission that is supernatural. Whether you're baking bread or building homes, leading meetings or sweeping floors, if your heart is surrendered to Christ, then your work becomes a holy mission. You weren't meant to be contained in the world's system. You were meant to disrupt it. You weren't meant to blend in. You were meant to bring transformation. That's why Jesus said, "Go into all the world," not to hide, not to survive, but to invade every sphere of culture with the power and love of God. To make disciples, not just converts, to baptize, to teach, to heal, to release the presence of heaven wherever your feet walk. So don't ask God if you're called, you are. Don't wait for confirmation. He already gave the commission. The only question now is, will you go? Will you step out of the small thinking that says your life is about getting by? Or will you embrace the high calling to bring heaven to earth? God is not hiring workers for the world's economy. He is sending ambassadors for his kingdom, and if you're listening, he's saying it now. Not later, not someday, but now. Go.